few minutes, Anada Hanafi as well. So really excited to have these four panelists talking to us today about a very important topic that all medtech startups and biotools startups are faced with, which is hiring, firing, and inspiring. So how do you grow and manage a team? So as many of you know, having the right team can make or break your startup, determines, who's at the table. You end up spending more time with these people than sometimes you do your own family and your friends. So how do you put the right people together, not just for skills, but also for personality? How do you manage conflict when it arises? And how do you inspire the people in your organization to be their very best? So very excited to have the BioTools program and the MedTech Innovator cohorts here with us today. And those of you streaming this from LinkedIn as well, thank you so much for joining. If you guys have any questions for our panelists as we're going through these topics, feel free to put them into the MedTech Innovator event that we have in the comments for this session. And our wonderful events and marketing assistant, Gabby, will get those over to me to ask our panelists. So without further ado, let's hear some intros from the amazing folks we have joining us here today. Let's start out with John Compton from Agile Search. You want to give about a minute background on yourself, John?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nicole. It's a real pleasure and even honor to be here today with such a awesome innovation program globally now. It's amazing. So let's see. I'm John Compton. I'm the president of Agile Search. And I'm a veteran. I had an opportunity to go to West Point and served in the military as a Ranger qualified. I was a military police officer, served overseas. And after that, I came back, went into corporate America for a few years. And then I realized that was not a great fit for me personally. And I found myself in the innovation world. I got my MBA from Babson. It was a wonderful entrepreneurial world to immerse in, and Agile Search is a company I started out of the Babson MBA program in Boston, and that was 19 years ago. And so over that period, I've been fortunate enough to work with hundreds of companies and hopefully impact a lot of careers in great and meaningful ways. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to being on this panel and talking about some great issues in innovation.
Thank you so much, John. John's been a fantastic supporter of our MTI ecosystem as well. So glad to have him in this, sharing his wisdom. Next up, we've got Karen Walker Johnson, who's the Executive Chair and Interim CEO at Clever Care Health Plan.
Hi, and thank you so much, Nicole. It is definitely a pleasure to join this really esteemed group of panelists, but also to be able to participate in this program. I've had the pleasure over the last year or so to get to know the folks at MedTech Innovator and meet some of the cohort, and I'm just inspired by what you're doing in the healthcare space. I am a nurse by background. And did a stint and went to law school. And so I would say that I probably have a pretty unique background and set of experiences. I've always been in healthcare and have spent the last 35 plus years either working on the provider side of things, working for hospital systems, et cetera. And the other side, I spent working for insurance companies. And 2.5 years ago, I retired. And what I've been doing since that time, which is most relevant, I think, here, is I've been doing advising for a lot of startup companies. I've also been doing a lot of board governance work, and so I serve on several boards. But most recently, what I've done is I serve as the executive chair for a company that started a little over 6 years ago. We provide services for seniors in the managed care space. And earlier this year, I took on the role as interim CEO for the company. So I can relate to what a lot, I think, of the folks here are doing. We're scaling right now, and we're hiring and doing all the things that we're going to talk about today. So again, it's just a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to hearing from my cohort here, the panelists. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, Karen. We're all looking forward to hearing your wisdom in so many spaces, startups, insurance, and also large companies. So it will be really good to see that lens on this hiring angle. So next up, we've got Reza, who is actually an alum of our MTI program from our 2022 cohort at Lead Optic. So Reza, I'd love to hear about you.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And it's an honor to be here, especially as an alumni that gain a lot of insight talking to our peer at the MTI. I'm CEO of Lead Optics. My background is a technical background. I have a grad school graduate degree in optics, and that makes it a little bit harder for hire because when you're in grad school, you have a project that you're mostly working on it. You have a little bit of collaboration and transition to being a founder, especially second founder. I did a lot of mistake. I hope I can share some of experience today and people doesn't do. You will do mistake and you only learn from mistake, at least based on my experience. And it's an honor to share the panel with John and Karen here.
Thank you so much, Reza. That's great, and love having our alumni back. Really can resonate with the cohort that we've got here. So for those listening on LinkedIn, if you're not familiar with the MedTech Innovator Program, we typically have around 65 companies in our MedTech Innovator cohort each year. A very selective application process, and only about 5% of companies get in. So really best of the best in med devices and diagnostic space. And then we also have our BioTools cohort here. So 20 companies also with around a 5% acceptance rate that are really changing the game in B2B biotools. So new technologies for hospital labs, for other lab environments as well that are more like software, new microscopy tools, new cell gene therapy technologies, things like that, that are going to be valuable in developing the next generation of medicines and technologies. So really interesting companies that we've got here and are going to be changing the world very soon. So always great to have our alums back for this. Awesome. So as I mentioned, we're also going to be joined by Nada Hanafi in a few minutes as well, who's the co-founder and board director at MedTech Color and the founder and manager at MedTech Strategy Advisors. So when she hops on, we'll hear from her as well. But to kick things off, so we are talking obviously today about hiring, firing, and inspiring. So very different topics, but all tied together into this team culture narrative. So we'll start off talking about, how do you find the right members for your team? How do you onboard them and also conduct interviews, things like that. And then we'll transition into firing. So when things get challenging, how do you help an employee move on to other opportunities, and then finally inspiring, which, the great team members that you have, how do you keep them motivated and inspired to keep, moving the needle in these very challenging technical spaces? So a really fun set of questions we've got here for our panelists, and looking forward to hearing their wisdom. So, I'll kick things off, with a question around that was actually submitted by our cohort, and this is a very technical question to start off with. But startups, as we know, often start up with absolutely no funding, and soon they start getting grants and then investments, but often are bootstrapped at the beginning, and so deciding when to hire and bring on full-time employees is an important decision to make, especially when there are contractors, consultants, and potentially other members of your team that could wear this hat or role as well. So I know this is a very complicated question to start with, but when is really the right time to start to consider hiring a role for full-time versus going for a contractor or consultant? So Reza, maybe we'll start with you for this one.
Sure, thanks. That's the question, and we always struggle with it as well, especially at the beginning. Either you don't have any fund or you have a little bit of money. What we have done, and it really helped us, was when even we get in a small amount of pre-seed money, but me and co-founder decided to not take any money out of that and just work for free. The reason was, if you do that, you start building prototype, you understand what the product would be. Because at the beginning, you have an idea in your mind, but believe me, it's gonna change a lot during the years. It just is completely will be different in 6 months and in a year. At the beginning, you don't know actually what the product. If you don't know what's the product, you don't know who to hire for. What we have done is we just build as much as product prototype we could do based on the knowledge we have, based on getting in, I don't know, somebody off the Upwork doing some for us, somebody off somewhere else, some friend do for us, to get it as close as possible to something useful and meaningful. Then the problem show itself. Okay, I need electronics, PCB design. I need somebody know how to drive a motor. It just become much, much clearer. Again, depending on the amount of fund, you need to decide whether you want to hire a generalist or a very, very specialist. I think one thing that I don't want to take it too much of time, but you need to build as much as you can with your co-founder, with your network, with a small amount of money. So when you understand the problem, you know which kind of people you need to hire. So beginning contractor might help, but full-time will reduce your runway in the startup at the beginning.
Yeah, great advice. So really depends, is that a niche skill you need or not, or can a generalist tackle this? Karen or John, do one of you have an inkling for, what types of roles you might want, a specialist for specifically? And maybe that's, someone you would want to hire specifically for that role. John, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure, Nicole. So as far as a 1099 hire, I would say for two main reasons. One is it's a clear gap in your organization, whether that's one founder or two founders and a helper, whatever that looks like for your early stage startup. So functional area gaps where you don't have expertise, you certainly wouldn't want to outsource anything at that point and spend money on something that you're really good at, right? So that's the main rule of thumb. And then other than that, it's bringing, and that can be up to full-time or part-time. And other than that, and that's perfectly legal, obviously. There are some rules around 1099s, but they're pretty easy to not intentionally abuse, right? You just need to be smart about it. But every state does have their nuances. So the other piece that is a real opportunity in 1099 hires is not just, say, technical doers, think software, anything, nuances of software in the thousands, and then architecture, the skills beyond coding as well, right? Even finance and accounting can be a short-term project. But think also in terms of where you may have skill gaps and professional gaps in your executive ranks. When you do have the money, and it doesn't take a lot, but when you do have the money, so it's all about doing things efficiently. Whether you hire full-time or 1099, there are really two things at play. You have efficiency of your capital, of your people, of your time, efficiency, and you have peak performance. That's the other thing at play. And that is the dance. And I'm sorry to say there's no perfect formula for it. That is a business problem that has not yet been completely optimized. But when you really consider those two things, and you got to think about you as founders, that's where you make your decisions where to bring in external talent. We could talk about it a lot, but that's what I've seen over the years works best.
Yeah, thanks for the insight, John. Really helpful to think in terms of, skill gaps and how can you be most efficient in getting this task complete. Karen, what have been your thoughts through all these experiences? When is the right time to bring in a full-time team member for a role versus, a contract or consultant?
A couple of things as I was listening to my other panelists, I was thinking is that, first of all, I really agree, John, and what you shared around kind of what's the delicate balance there. The way, and what I've seen most successful, particularly with a couple of the companies that I'm working with now, is it is really when you're starting to think about scaling, when you're thinking about what is going to be needed to take your company to whatever the next phase is in the journey of your company. And so it's thinking about what type of talent do I need in order to make that happen? And can I get that talent on a part-time basis? Do I need that talent, 40 plus hours a week? Can I think about potentially a balance with some equity in my company, which helps me from a cost perspective? Really it is thinking through much more long-term, which I know when you're first starting your company, that's not necessarily, as Reza pointed out, you're just trying to get like your idea fine-tuned, et cetera, right? But one of the things that I've seen that has not worked to people's advantage is if they aren't thinking also more long-term. And so I think when you're thinking about when and who you should bring in and how long, of a runway you have before you're going to need them full time, always think ahead. Don't shortchange yourself in that regards.
Thanks,
If you
Karen.
can get people to you can get them as 1099s, that's ideal. It's also a good way to kind of test whether or not it's going to be a good fit in your organization. So they get the opportunity to evaluate you and your company, and you get the opportunity to do the same to make sure that, do we really want to have a long-term relationship? Is this something that is going to work for both parties?
I love that idea. Yeah, testing the waters, seeing, if it's going to work long term, and that focus on, really what are your needs going to be, not just tomorrow, but in startups, needs fluctuate daily, hourly sometimes. And so with that in mind, so Reza, you've, hired for a bunch of roles in your startup. What are some important things that you look for when hiring a new employee? Is it, really just about like that one niche skill, they check that box technically, or is flexibility and adaptability something you also look for?
I think it's a combination of both, especially in a startup. If it becomes successful, which means you have a technical edge that you need to develop, which means it's not me too. You need to build something new. You need to have somebody with a solid background, and I'm very, very specific in a specific area. At the same time, it's in a whole team, depend on your product, how complex it is. For example, for us, we have a disposable part, we have a capital equipment, and they need to work together. That's where the flexibility and the attitude come. So if I want to put something on the top, is attitude. And most of our question for the first screening, we have no technical question for first screening. We have a 5 interview. First is only attitude. If somebody doesn't pass that, we don't want to know whether they are good technically or not, because it's gonna generate more heat than solving problem. And it wasn't like this before. Before, get the smart people, come here and just solve. No, it really
In a
doesn't
room, they'll
work.
do fine.
Yeah, just and the other thing is people can learn. It's not just people need to know everything at day one. And then we go to the technical skill, and they need to have at least solid background. Then also it come back to my first answer to the question. You need to know what you are building and what kind of skill do you need. For capital equipment, a lot of capital equipment out there, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to know somebody that builds this before. If they don't, it's gonna take even if the smartest people on earth, they're gonna take a lot of time to learn the nuance. But for our disposable, which is we think our optics is very, very ahead of any other optics, I wanted somebody to can think out of the box, even though it doesn't have a specific skill, which is better. They are not biased. It's all come back to product. What do you need in short term? And most importantly, what do you need in long term? And make sure this hire, because you're not gonna hire 1 people. Right now we're 20 people. After 3 or 4, there will be a lot of weight on, is this coming to the team? Can work with the team or not? That's why we have 5 interviews. They will come on site, talk to the team. We take them out for dinner or lunch. If it's possible, we get them work for a month or 2 months as a part-time or as a contractor, not only to find out whether they can deliver, but also they can work with the rest of the team. It's very, very complex and it takes a lot of time. To put it in, one of our mechanical engineer, it takes us 11 months to hire. They might think a startup doesn't have 11 months to hire somebody, but that person frees the design in 3 months. We could hire somebody after 2 months and never freeze the design.
Yeah, thanks, Rosa. Super helpful feedback there, and really love that you mentioned as well the ability of employees to learn and grow in their roles, and so emphasis being placed on their long-term potential. They're not just in this to do one single task. We have our other panelists who just joined us as well, Nada Hanafi. So Nada, would love to hear about a minute of your background, and then yeah, we're talking all about hiring. So love to ask you some questions on that.
Awesome. Good morning, and thank you so much for allowing me to join you midstream. It's great to be here. I did try to call in while driving and hear the phenomenal backgrounds of the other panelists. So thank you for having me. I'm Neda Hanafi, and as you mentioned, I am co-founder and board director of MedTech Color, a nonprofit focused on diversifying the medtech industry, because we strongly believe, and as many of us all know, that when you have a diverse workforce, and especially a leadership that represents the patients we're developing our technologies and products for, we create better products that actually meet the unique needs of end users. I'm also a co-founder of my own consulting firm, and we focus on working with companies, startups, different stages of the product development to help them navigate evidence generation and getting to market in a least burdensome manner, interfacing on their behalf with FDA. I'm a biomedical engineer by training, master's in biomaterials and in public health from Hopkins. And I'm a veteran. Well, I say I grew up at the FDA. So I was also in service, John, and then left FDA after 12 and a half years. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation as MedTech Color collaborates closely with MedTech Innovator. So thank you for having me.
Love our collaboration with MedTech Color, and so definitely check it out if this is a mission important to you and your organization. So Nada, we were just talking about hiring, and you talked about how the best innovations really come out of diverse teams that also reflect the patient populations that you serve. So a lot of times startups, I will admit I was in a startup, don't do the best job recruiting, and so often are like, well, we got 5 applications all from people in the same demographic, which are my demographic that I know. How can a startup actually go about recruiting a more diverse pool of candidates? Do you have any tips and tricks for this?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I'd love to hear from our other panelists as well, but I think it's intentionality. So like you said, it's being aware from the start that if you have diverse perspectives, not just in terms of race, ethnicity, in terms of age, in terms of experience, in terms of rate, in terms of sex, female, male, you lead to a much better problem-solving approach to improve your product. So I think if you realize that your candidates are all of a similar demographic, first being aware, like you said, Nicole, and I think it's a comfort piece. We always tend to go towards what we know and who looks like us, but are you willing to be uncomfortable and seek outside perspective? So I think it's looking at other organizations and recruiters that would seek a diverse candidate pool for you to select from. But honestly, it starts with awareness, and it starts at the leadership level, that you do actually want to create this culture of inclusivity and diversity. And there's many people always have this thing, and I'd be interested to hear Karen speak about this, but we can't find them. There's no pool. There's no pipeline. Where are they? They're everywhere. And it's having to start with saying, I can look outside of the pond that I'm used to fishing in. Yeah. Because there is some phenomenal leader talent out there. But I'll stop. I think it's just the first thing I'd say is being aware. If you're aware, then you can start to change it.
First up is intentionality. Love it. Karen, what are your thoughts on this? Any tips?
I mean, hit the nail on the head. I was gonna say being intentional about it. I can share with you just a real life experience I have right now, a really niche population that we serve. So it's not only just Medicare beneficiaries, but it is Asian Medicare beneficiaries. And so we represent 6 different ethnicities primarily. And in terms of when you look at our staff, our team, 70% of my staff are reflective of the populations that we serve. And we've done that intentionally. And so it starts, as you said, Nada, at the very top. So there was a commitment when we were creating the company. I've been on the board a bit before I stepped into the interim role, but there was a lot of intentionality around culture, what was important to us, what was our North Star as a company. And from that, it became very apparent that it was inherent that we would have a leadership team that was reflective of that. So we started with our leadership team. And in terms of hiring, et cetera, not only were we looking for people who had specific experiences and skill sets, but we also wanted to understand how did they look at and think about the philosophy around culture and diversity and inclusiveness. And that made us feel comfortable that putting those leaders in place, they would then in turn, when it came time for them to bring people onto their teams, have that same type of philosophy. And I think that is so important. It's that when you think about sourcing, it's, as Nada pointed out, it's looking outside of your comfort area. Think about people that colleagues, professionals that you respect, who may not look like you, who may have very different backgrounds than you do. Utilize them to help source when you start to look to hire. And then when you are actually doing the hiring, it's really important that you use a panel of diverse individuals in that hiring, because you don't want to have just one viewpoint, if you will, of what you're looking for. So if you've got a diverse panel of candidates, if you have a diverse panel of individuals who are participating in the interview process, you're more likely to end up with hires that are very diverse in terms of background, experience, gender, ethnicity, all kinds of different things.
Thanks, Karen. Super helpful. And I love that you mentioned, the interviewers need to be diverse as well, to, understand and appreciate the differences that are being brought into the organization. John, you've been, you're a recruiter. You've been on, the other side of this, trying to find candidates. So what are some tips and tricks that you have for increasing a pool?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so let's start with the foundation of in a startup, especially if you're one founder or 2 founders, if you're actually going to make a hire, right? And you're that early stage, the money might be coming from friends and family. It might be coming from a seed fund or NIH funding, but if you're making a hire, this is a huge decision. And so to think, to really be thoughtful about diversity, you have to be, let's just call it out, you have to be really committed to it. So I feel beyond that foundation, it's casting, think of it as casting a wide net as possible, right? And so as a search firm, which is part of what I do, we're more of a talent strategy partner, but as a search firm, what that means to us is we are posting jobs, yes, and we post jobs in unique places to attract talent. Most of those are skill-based, based on the position, but a lot of what we do is outreach, direct outreach to the passive, currently employed talent market, as well as the unemployed talent market that might not see your job or might be looking in the wrong places. And so in many ways, it's not an argument to use a firm, but when you have active outreach that is, you're able to better not only where you're posting your jobs, but how you're advertising to the world, and that does matter. It results in a more diverse candidate pool, because that's what you want to end up with. I mean, Reza, 11 months to make an engineering hire, right? Because you wait for the right person. And that goes back to that balance of how long can you wait? What's the opportunity cost, right? Is it time to hire? Well, there are some signs that it is time to hire when you're missing out on revenue opportunities, right? And Reza, your example was really a very solid technical hire, but there are administrative burdens too, right? What do CEOs focus on? CEOs focus on raising capital, distributing resources, making strategic decisions, and building a team, right? Those 4 things. Administration, when are you going to find time to do that? So one hire early a chief of staff, right? Because depending on your skill set, that can be an important early hire. And then how do you go about doing that? How do you ensure that you value diversity? There's data, clear data. We did a statistical study within the last month, and I think we came up with 6, 7 studies that from McKinsey, Deloitte, all the big firms. It's no, if, you know, these are from 2021, 2022, is if you have diverse teams, both in terms of gender and diverse teams, both entity, which is of course ways of thinking as well, you will have better results financially. And those all played out differently, but you know, to go about it in the right manner, it does involve being deliberate. It involves talking to lots of people, you know, and I'll stop there, but that's the main thing. You got to talk to a lot of people, be willing to look past the pedigree at all times, look at mountains that people have climbed, right? Versus what necessarily you're used to seeing on a resume. There's a lot of things go into it. I'm passionate about it, so, but I will let someone else talk. That's my 2 cents.
I love that feedback, John. And like looking at what mountains people have climbed already, you know, in a startup, you're going to face many, many mountains and hills of various sizes, valleys, as well. So knowing, if this person can, surmount these without becoming, you know, too, caught up in the challenges and not willing to push forward is so important. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And, also, you know, we've been talking about the interview process so far. And so, you know, maybe there's ways during the interview to find this out. And so Reza, you've led, you know, 5-round interviews with many employees. What are some of your favorite interview questions that you've asked potential employees to your company?
Sure. So we have, as I said, our first interview, which is basically gauging whether it's the right person and right attitude toward the startup. Especially hiring for a startup is completely different from hiring from for a big company. It's a completely mindset. So a lot of people have different perspective of a startup. One of them being become rich, which is nothing too bad to make money. Obviously, I'm doing a startup because there isn't a chance to be financially set. But if that's the goal, that's very short-term thinking and just make the startup suffer. So going around that, 2 questions that we ask. One is I ask, which is very, very helpful, and people share with you something that basically you can make a really clear decision based on that question is, can you tell me something surprising about your career so far? And people share with you a wild story, which is not necessarily bad, but it tell you a lot of things that they don't tell you. The other question is that I steal it from Simon Sinek and we start implement it. It's a little bit more nuanced question is, can you tell me something that might go wrong now so that if I'm not surprised when it happened? Basically give them an opportunity to tell them about their weakness. Because if somebody asks me what's weakness, I don't have any weakness. But this human DNA, immediately you will defend. I don't have any weakness, which everybody have. But we wrap this around. I'm gonna say it again. It's super powerful. Just try it. All the founders try it to get it right. Can you tell me something that might go wrong now, so that I'm not surprised when it happens? One of the people told me, if you hire me and micromanage me, I would be leaving. Great. If it's a good person, hire him and not be micromanaged, but it tell you exactly what bothered them.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In MedTech Innovator, we do a fun exercise, a personality exercise when we're onboarding around what our preferred, you know, management communication styles are and our personality as well. So I think recognizing that different people have different personalities and like to be, you know, communicated with in different ways is so very important. Like, for example, you know, I'm a very visual learner. If I see something in writing, I'll probably remember it the rest of my life. But if I hear something, like sometimes it just goes in one ear and out the other. So knowing this about your employees is so important. So I'm glad you've, asked this for your team, Reza. It's so important to understand, going into it. No one's going to be perfect. And so how can you best handle that moving in? So let's say, we've decided to move forward with a candidate. They're a really great fit for our team culture, and are really also going to, make a great contribution overall, bring really unique and diverse insights in. How do we, this is again, a very important question, ensure that these employees are going to be well compensated for their background, especially when they're coming from so many diverse places. Sometimes, coming from academia, sometimes larger roles in industry. How do you go about thinking, what is the appropriate compensation, especially for a startup that might have limited resources? So Karen, you want to take this one?
Yes, I kind of alluded to this earlier, and that is that, there are organizations that benchmark and where you can get kind of market-based salary information. And so that's one place you can start. But I think because it's a startup, it's often you want to think about equity. And so how can you balance what may not necessarily be the highest salary to start, but that individual, getting back to what Reza said, I was thinking about is if they really want to be a part of a startup, they want to be a part of creating something, etc. You can kind of, in a way, dangle in front of them, if you will, that if we can make this successful, then you get to participate in that. Right. And so the one of the ways to do that is to have equity. I think it's really important. It was one of the things I was going to add when Reza was talking about questions he asked, is one of the things we look for in hiring is the person scrappy, is the way I would describe it. Right. Are they willing to do whatever it takes in order to make things happen, to do things that, may not necessarily be in the job description? Are they willing to, spend long hours? Are they willing to do things that are uncomfortable? And so when you think about you're hiring someone like that, then you want to reward them for that. And so, you've got this range, if you will, of what are market-based salaries. But in this instance, they're also going to have the opportunity to get an upside when you create value in the company. And so you want to give them that as an incentive as well. And then the other thing that we think about is there the opportunity for some type of bonus, if you will? And so, you can tie that to key performance indicators in your startup. So say if we hit certain milestones by this year or next year, there will be this lump sum bonus payment that I might get. And that can kind of offset, if you will, if I'm willing to take a little bit of a lower salary to start. So I think there are creative ways that you can bring someone in and give them enough incentive and align the incentives around getting the outcomes you want in your company, but also fairly compensate them as well. And don't forget their benefits. Can you give benefits? Can they get some time off? Are you able to potentially, cobble together access to health insurance at a discount? I mean, think about, when you think about a comp package, it's not just salary. It's potential bonus, it's equity, it's benefits.
Yeah, glad you mentioned all of that. And there are so many ways to, compensate in startups and make it attractive as well. So want to make sure we get to our firing and inspiring questions as well in the public portion of this. We'll definitely get back to more hiring when we go to our cohort Q&A. And so reminder to the cohort, if you guys have questions in mind for our panelists, please put those in the Q&A box. If you're listening on LinkedIn, hopefully we can still get to those if you have any urgent things you want to ask our panelists. Nada, any small company that works together closely is going to be faced by disagreements. We know this. We see this in our lives every day. What are some of your tips for de-escalating situations, especially disagreements between coworkers?
Great question. Healthy disagreement is good. It's very good. Healthy, respectful, right? And you should expect it. Any team forming, there's the forming, there's the storming, norming, and then you want to get to performing. And that's the goal. So I think it goes back to much of the discussion, also clearly understanding roles and responsibilities and what that leader is willing to put out in terms of being inclusive, being and wanting to hear the different perspectives? Is it a very hierarchical structure, or is it truly a collaborative structure that welcomes different perspectives? Do you feel like you have a safe environment to be able to voice your true opinion, and if you disagree with something? So I think, again, it really stems from the leader and what they present in terms of, I am welcome to input. And clearly, you know, one of the good questions I actually have asked, I like to hear from folks I want to hire, is what type of leader you are. Similar to how they want to be managed, they should understand what type of leader I am, or that hiring manager is, and see if there is going to be a clash, or can we get over it? So when disagreement comes up, I think it's calling it, it's being authentic. One of my best advice is hard on the process, gentle on the person. It's not about you. I don't want to attack you. It's, when you did this, this is how I felt, or this was the consequences when you didn't complete this work I assigned. Here's what happened. So can we get to agreement and a mutual understanding? Seeking to understand first. Can you help me understand why X, Y, Z? Or if someone's getting very heated up in a discussion, you know, it's healthy. As long as we're not name calling, it's okay. I want you to show up as your authentic self. If they need help and coaching in terms of how to deliver that, that's something we can offer. It's also a good way for you as a manager or CEO or whomever you are to get insights into what the triggers are, because we all have triggers and we're all working to do better. So I believe in this continuous improvement model. I think everyone on this panel clearly believes in that. No one's perfect. And as long as we're trying our best, I say something to my son every day, and my daughter now, who just started school at 3.5, is be kind, be curious, and be courageous. Come from a place of kindness, curiosity to want to understand, learn more, and courageous in maybe asking those hard to ask questions, right? And many people might be thinking it, but might not have the courage to ask it. So you might open that space. So I just think it's, if you have that culture of welcoming it, it can lead to so much more. And when you get over that hump of the storming, you'll be performing like no one's business.
Great feedback, Nada. Honestly, I might pull you in if I'm ever having a disagreement in the future. I love your approach and taking everything, you know, holistically as well in consideration with this. So, you know, sometimes disagreements can get to the point, you know, where it's, you know, just not going to work out with the company, or maybe it's, you know, the performance of the employee is really not what you need in order to make progress. So this is a really hard question, but, you know, how do you know when it is the right time to actually go ahead and fire someone and let them go? It's obviously very difficult, but Reza, you know, what have been your thoughts, processes around this as you've managed a team?
I think the short answer is, you know, in your heart. So your brain gonna fight it, but you know it right away. So a lot of people told me fire fast, and I knew it. And when it come, it was really hard, and I still give it another month to, and I regret it. So even though people told me, and I'm gonna tell to the panel, if you, to the people audience that have a founder and they need to fire immediately. A lot of people tell me, I knew it, I still didn't do it fast enough. Obviously, you don't want to just, it's like any other things. If problem come, easiest way is to fire people. That's not how to do it. As a leader, you do everything in your power to make sure the people that you hire to be successful. Give them resources, whatever resources you can. Make sure they work well with the team, make sure the project is correct, whatever, go extra mile. And the thing that it really make it easy to decide, at least for me, after hiring maybe already 30 people, normally we are very patient with people, but impatient with result. And that come into the, whether that person take any action, no matter what it is. Maybe their action is wrong. Maybe that's not the right approach to solve problem. Whether they take an action or they just come with excuse. Oh, this come late, that become a very clear cut. If there's a project, they don't take action, that's for us very, very clear cut. Either they don't know what they are doing, or they don't want to do, or they don't get from the team. I hope it's still very hard for me, easy to set, hard to implement. But again, coming back to my answer, short answer is in your heart, you know when it is.
Yeah, great. Great answer, Reza. Well, hopefully, people that might be feeling this now know that maybe that is the right step. But sometimes this isn't by choice. This is a financial situation, you know, with the company. And we've seen this a lot in the past couple of years with large companies. I've seen it definitely. And so, how do you approach large company, you know, layoffs? Or if, for example, your startup didn't end up raising its next round and you can't support your current employees, John, how would you go about a situation like that?
Yeah, I would love to address that. I want to just, if I can just pick up where Reza was also. I think there's really two types of employee issues. One is an employee who's a great performer. By the way, in startup world, you don't see this very much because things happen very fast in startup world, as we all know. But a great performer who suddenly isn't performing. So that's a different issue than we made a hire and not performing, right? And I think it's in startup world, that's what we want to focus on here. The other one, get to the root cause, right? And that's hard. Good questions lead to that. But this one, the main thing is 90-day plan. In startup world, things happen fast. I cannot recommend and emphasize enough all best practices, 90-day plan. And job descriptions are great, but they were kind of like one of those areas where we kind of went wrong in HR. And I'm one of those. We use job descriptions, obviously, but performance objectives. When an employer and employee can agree on key performance objectives to occur in the first 30, 60, 90 days, you know, make them realistic. I know this is basic stuff, but this is the stuff that goes wrong, right? This is the stuff that always goes wrong because people are on the different pages, you know, and so so that makes all the difference. It is not only a great, and so if you're interview, you're actually focusing on what this person is able to do to get accomplished, not just what they've done, right? And usually everyone's coming into the onboarding with a very well-defined first 90 days. And for people who really are all that in a bag of chips, they will outperform. And that's how it's done. So, yeah. On the big company layoff things, man, I tell you what, we haven't talked about the job market right now, but medtech job market is not pretty. That's medtech, that's digital health tech, that's biotools, right? Aside from biopharmaceutical, and I do have some data I can show later on that. So let's just recognize in real time for companies who are hiring right now, it is a market where there are a lot of amazing people on the market right now. All right, so that's a fact.
Yeah.
And depending on what stage you're in, you can not only help somebody out, but make a great hire, right? And on salaries, people are more open for a great opportunity and willing to consider less on the base salary. Not that you want to be cheap, you want to reward your employees. The important thing is transparency and equity across the organization. You can hire as low as you want. Seriously, if you can get people to do it for equity, do it, because that's how much money you got right now. And that's how you win hearts and minds too, by the way, for people who would do that. And then you build it up from there. Just trying to be really realistic about startup world.
Well, definitely in the last half hour, we'll chat more about this, because I know this was a question from our BioTools cohort. So
there's a ton of job seekers out there right now, many of whom may be watching this, and people are very frustrated because applicants in a week, you know, and people are frustrated on the other side of the table too, because 1,000 applicants, what's that yield for a recruiter? So many of them would so there's tools, tricks, and trades to sort of work through all that now. But in terms of big company layoffs, that's something, you know, big medtech is going to have to figure out. But a lot of big company layoffs, the majority might not be a great fit for startup world. Some are. I don't say that's a big stereotype, because but startup people come from a very different mold than larger company people. But
Great. Yeah.
my 2 cents.
For sure. Yeah. We'll talk about that more in the last half hour, I think, because this is a really hot topic right now is the job market and the space in general. We did get one question from LinkedIn I want to make sure we get to before we move on to inspiring, which I think is the most important part. But someone from LinkedIn asked, how should an employee deal with an abusive manager, especially if HR is not always on site at a multi-site company? Does anyone have a good answer for this? Karen?
Well, this is a difficult one to answer in the context of a startup. Typically what I would say is that if it was a little bit of the company was a little further along, you may have a board, or you may at least have an advisory board. That might be the place to go if you don't have ready access to HR, if you will. Would be, your board would be some place to go. Maybe another manager who you could trust within the company might be another place that individual could go. But it is difficult when you're in a really small environment to give a good answer on that one. But again, hopefully they have some type of board or advisors. Maybe it's a co-founder who isn't the direct manager, might be the individual that they could go to talk about that. The hard thing might be they may just need to make a decision that this is not the place for them to be. And so that's something else to take into mind. But if it's okay, I just want to go back because I think a couple of things I wanted to share around the whole piece around firing, et cetera. And Reza, you kind of mentioned this, and that is, I have the adage of hire slow, fire fast. So take your time when you're hiring, don't rush that. And Reza, I appreciate it when you said it took 10 months, et cetera, to hire someone. Take your time to find the right individual for whatever role you're putting. But if it's not working, don't delay, fire fast. And what I will advise you there is document. So, as you mentioned, I think, John, you said, it's really important to set in that first 90 days or so expectations around kind of key performance indicators that will help the employee know that they're on the right track, that they're meeting your expectations. But if they're not, during that process, document it. So you may fire them, but what you don't want is them coming back and bringing a suit against you, for example. So if you have good documentation, then you're covered. And so that was just something I wanted to make sure that we shared with you as a startup. Document and set those expectations up front. And then finally, around accountability, yes, as the boss, you have a lot of responsibility to help your employees be successful. But ultimately, it is the employee's accountability in terms of their performance. And so make sure there's a balance there, is that you are giving them, removing barriers, giving them support so they can be successful. But ultimately, it's their responsibility and accountability for their performance. And so don't forget that comes again with that documentation piece.
Yeah.
Can I jump in, Nicole?
Sure, yeah.
Because Karen, that was beautiful. And the documentation piece, to the question from the LinkedIn person, you document on the other end as the employee as well, in terms of how you've been treated. So documentation, it's like data, show me the evidence. Everybody asks about that regardless of where you are. So it's both ways. And I also say, if you're encountering a manager that is being abusive or obstructive, you've got to know your self-worth, right? And you got to dig deep and take a look in the mirror and say, I know who I am. And if you feel you're on the right, another way is always seeking counsel from folks you trust. And if you're being abused, you may not be the only one. You may not be the only one in that situation. And it's actually that person that may need to be removed. So I think you have to document, you have to know your North Star. You mentioned it early, Karen, why you're there. And you're setting your boundaries. I love the fact we've all keep talking about transparency, being very clear. And sometimes it's a hard situation, but even if you want to have those conversations, maybe I'm not willing to have a conversation on my own with you. I need to have someone else there. Like, most predators or abusers or bullies, they're not just doing it to one, or they try to pick on what maybe appear weak. But I think you really need to have the confidence. And if you don't, find someone to help you. I think people are out there want to help and be on the right side, and the documentation goes on both ends.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And also providing feedback, as things come up. I think sometimes things can boil over if there's just so many little incidents along the way that people aren't made aware of. And a lot of times it's like, well, maybe, what HR will take care of this in a year when I send them my full list. But, it's small conversations here and there, like, you really shouldn't have said this. This isn't, there are more polite ways. Here's an example to go about this, can be really helpful. And for managers as well, managers love hearing feedback on how they can improve, sometimes even more than employees, because we serve, managers will serve you as someone who's led a team, myself, like, we want to know how to support you the best. So whoever asked that on LinkedIn, great question, really important topic, and hope that was
The
helpful.
microaggressions and the macroaggressions add up.
Yes.
And if you come from a place everyone's trying their best, so giving that person the benefit of the doubt, voicing, but then if it continues, and to your point, Nicole, I think it's in the moment, right? In the moment, so they have a chance to adjust.
Correct, and know exactly where their mind was and why they might have said that as well, to correct their actions in the future. Awesome. So want to end on a high note, which is inspiring. So we talked about building a team, keeping it, maintaining it, letting people go, but the great employees that you do have and you want to keep around, who are very productive, how would you go about motivating them? Are there specific, education courses, training workshops? We talked about compensation at the beginning, but culture wise, how do you foster a very strong startup culture where your employees feel motivated? Reza, you want to take that one?
Sure. I think it depends on the employee. So we have a diverse employee in terms of how they work. Some of them are super energetic that just come at 6 a.m. and just, I need to kick them out of the office. They just go rest. And some of them are, it doesn't mean which one is good, which one is bad, but you need to first understand their perspective, what they care more about. And from there, you can just inspire them. For the younger people, what the advice I give to them is, this is the time to learn. You're gonna learn a lot in a startup, and also give them an opportunity, new thing to learn. And when they feel it over 3 months, oh, I learned, and I'm an optical engineer, but I learned a little bit of machine learning. Oh, that I couldn't learn in a bigger company. If I go bigger company, I need to, from day to night, I need to only design an optics. So first understand what's their perspective, what they want to gain, and where they are in their career. Some people are more mature, they're thinking about retirement, so they only care about saving, which I'm gonna care when I'm just getting older. Compensate them if they do well, just give them a surprise bonus at the middle of their things. It's all dependent what state they are, what can work for them. And also the other thing is, I think people at the end of the day, when compensation is good, everybody needs something to live. They want in a good environment in company. I think the best thing to inspire, to have a collaborating team that respect each other. And that's the #1 rule of any CEO of leader. Leader and CEO are servant of the employee. It's not that we say it like in a cliche. You are there to make sure you're a firefighter, at least for a small startup. You are make sure to just, it's well-run machine, and people work together and people enjoy when they wake up. Oh, another day, let's build things. That's the most inspiring for the team. And I know different things, but it's very, very, for whole team is having a great team working together. For individual, it depends on where they are in career, what they can do, what they want to do. Some people doesn't want, I don't know, something. Some people really care about equity. If they do well, give it to them.
Yeah, love the idea of a surprise bonus as well, even no matter how small surprises, or surprise lunch after a big milestone, something like that, whatever works, I think can be really helpful. So we're going to transition soon into our cohort Q&A, but Karen, I'd love to hear from you in this before, because Karen has to hop off before this. What, are your tips for motivating employees and keeping them inspired?
Well, one thing I would say is do something that's fun and surprise people in doing so. So remember, in a startup, you are working really hard. They're working long hours, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you intersperse some fun things. Even if you have people who are remote, you can do things like sip and paint, where everybody can be online and they can paint. There are people who will do this for you. Everybody, you send them a bottle of wine or whatever their beverage choice is, and they can do it from home. But that's a fun thing that you do, that it has that camaraderie, et cetera. So we always pick lots of different fun things to do. Another is recognition. People just want you to say thank you. So, maybe if you have staff meetings, et cetera, make sure you always are celebrating and acknowledging someone. One of the things that we do is I ask my board members to send thank you notes, acknowledgement notes to my employees. It takes them a minute. They send an email to them. People love to hear thank you, right? So that's something else I would say. Another would be you can do lunch and learns. It doesn't cost a lot of money. So you can have all your staff maybe come together and you guys do it, in a Zoom. Everybody brings their own lunch, but you can pick something that is a learning opportunity that you share with everybody. So those are the kinds of things that immediately come to mind that don't cost a lot, but they can make such a big difference in inspiring people.
I love those, and things that are even low cost, and I love the idea of appreciation too. So when I was in team, for example, we had a Slack channel that was just kudos, and we just used it for giving shout outs to people that were doing really amazing that week, really went above and beyond. And so yeah, maybe think about things like that within your own team to promote appreciation across it. So with that, huge thank you to Karen in particular for joining us today. Who has to hop off, but thank you also John, Reza, and Nada, who are going to stick on for our cohort. And for everyone listening on LinkedIn, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you learned some great tips and tricks as you're growing, building, and maintaining your team. So thank you all so much, and hope to see you all next week. So next week we will have a joint webinar on Wednesday on boards. So building better boards and how to prevent a board room in those board meetings. So that'll be a fun one. Hope to see you all then.